So next we're going to hear about integration, the key to procurement success. And so while they are unmiking, I'm going to ask our next three panelists to come up, and you don't get chairs because they're not really panelists, they're going to be doing a presentation. So I'll take the chairs away, you're going to stand. Anders Lillebeck, I think you met him last night, Global Head of Procurement Support Services at QBE Insurance. Ryan Walicki, he's a partner at Nitor Partners. And Richard Waugh, who I think you should know by now, are going to come up and do our next presentation. Okay.
I'm actually going to let you're going to kick it off.
Good morning, everyone. Yeah, so we actually, being agile, sort of rewrote the title for this session, Underwriting Procurement Transformation Success at QBE Insurance, and a case study. And this one we're going to tag team. So and just as the project itself involved a lot of teamwork across our respective organizations, we want to share this story with you as a group, and hopefully when we get through the story, have some time left for questions and answers as well. And I'd like to call on Anders to really kick it off. We're going to talk about three components to transformation success, and this is not a mystery. It's people, process, and technology. And for the people side, I'd like to have Anders take us through that.
Sure. So a little bit about QBE and why procurement at QBE is happening right now. So we are a very, very old company, and we're probably one of the largest companies that you've never heard of. We are about 17,000 colleagues globally. We are located, our headquarters in Sydney, but we are a truly global company, which means we have presences in all five continents. Yes, thank you. And procurement is operating predominantly out of Sydney, Australia, London, England, and various parts of the United States. We also have a captive in Manila, where we're running a lot of our operations out of. We have businesses in Latin America and Asia Pacific. So we are a very traditional insurance company. Reinsurance is our business. And we had grown very conservatively through acquisition for most of our tenure. And then something happened in the early 2000s where we started acquiring businesses left and right. And this is the stuff I can't put on the slide, but essentially, we were growing by acquisition so fast we didn't integrate any of our back office systems. And essentially, if you looked at the revenue line, it was growing, but our cost line was growing faster. And that's typically a recipe for disaster. So back in early 2010-ish, the writing was on the wall, and management stepped in and said, we need to fix this, or we're not going to be here for very, very much longer. So that is sort of the impetus for how you get into this cost-saving mode. So some of the things that we were trying to do back then is pursue a globalization strategy, meaning that you can't have all these disparate functions in the different divisions, and you need to take cost out of the equation. So what does a large company do when they want to save money? Bring in consultants. Obviously, right? You bring in consultants. And consultants came in and basically worked on contingency, which is awesome, right? So you have no idea what your baseline is, and you hire consultants to work on contingency to take cost out of your procurement spend. Awesome. And they were doing that for about a year before somebody said, hey, this is not sustainable. Let's hire somebody to run this stuff once the consultants are gone. And they put it together, a design, and the three large spend buckets are claims, direct, indirect, and IT. And we have operations, like I said, in North America, Australia, and Europe. So we had three, and we still have three teams, procurement teams in those divisions, but they were very much independently run, and they all thought what they were doing was best in class and awesome across the board, right? So when we came in and did an assessment, we needed to figure out how we're going to make these teams do the same things in the same way globally. And that can be a challenge, especially when they're halfway across the world, or sometimes in the entire end of the world. So I just flew in from Sydney on Saturday night, actually, sorry. So it's part of the fun that you have working in a global company. And really, the consultant, surprise, surprise, didn't really think much about how this organization was going to work once they had left. So we had really no infrastructure to talk about. And the individual divisions also had no infrastructure to talk about, and we'll talk about that in a minute. So the challenges that I had coming in trying to systematize and trying to make folks do the same things in the same way globally was, first of all, we had no infrastructure that we could leverage across. We had some pockets of spend analytics, but it was done haphazardly, I would say. I mean, it's very typical quarter-end, year-end deal. You slam something in for like an enormously low price, and the quality is what it is. And we couldn't scale that globally at all. We had no e-sourcing to talk about whatsoever. And we had no real contract management to talk about whatsoever. We had a contract management system in one of the divisions, but we had no policy around it. So the information that was in the system, as you can imagine, was garbage. So we had a lot of metadata fields that were never filled out, or zero, or NA. And essentially, contract management was used as a workflow tool for the IT buying group, which is a natural fit, right? And we had a small procure-to-pay installation, and we still do in Europe, that basically deals with 25% of the spend in Europe, but 50% of that spend is done after the fact, which means we cut a PO to match an invoice, which we all know is best in class. So that is what we kind of started off with at QBE. So, I'm here in front of you guys. So obviously, the goal that we had was to standardize across, the organization, to do a technology-enabled process, to be able to communicate our value and and have one source for savings tracking, to have global visibility of our contracts, and one source for procurement spend, right? So bringing together, we have a very eclectic ERP back office. So we have 3 Oracle instances running the 3 major divisions, and then Latin America and Asia Pac have a plethora of different systems, but that's not where our majority of our spend is. So by pulling together 3 or 4 AP feeds, we actually get a good sense of what our spend is. So this is what we started off with, and having a team of 2 globally, essentially that was in charge of infrastructure, I knew I needed some help to get this done, especially since our global stakeholders are all over the place, and our first off the bat was contract management. And implementing contract management is not really exciting, especially not when you have at least 7 legal teams spread around the world that really cares deeply about contract management, yet they have done nothing to fix it on their own. So they have a lot of opinions and are paying for it, but they're happy to hold us up. So I knew that within my team of 1, plus myself, I wasn't going to be able to do this on my own. So I needed to find a technology solution where I could I'll buy the drink. I know Carl's going to hate me for saying this, right? Where I could buy one tool at a time because we weren't ready to go all in, but pick a solution that we can bite off contracts at first and then grow across the platform and go end to end. So with that, I'd worked with our friends at Nitor Partners before, and I decided to bring those guys in. We did talk to some other folks too, but that's not all that important. We ended up picking Nitor after a selection process. Sorry, I'm in procurement, I forgot. We brought Nitor in to help us with the build and sort of make sure we did things right. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Mr. Wallachy.
Thank you, sir. Good morning. I guess first I want to echo Ian's sentiment earlier about the sexless turkeys. We all feel horrible for them, so just get that out there. I agree with him. Second, I want to thank Anders for kind of bashing consulting in his opening statement. I'm a consultant, but he picked Nitor for a few reasons. I hope to highlight those today, but more importantly, I want to speak about the leadership that Anders provided, and then the work that Zycus and Nitor did together, hand in hand, to make his vision become a reality. First, who is Nitor? If you didn't see the giant green monster banner just outside those doors, I'll just do a quick commercial. We're a source-to-pay consultancy. We're based in Cleveland, Ohio. No Browns jokes. Good. But we live in the source-to-pay space. We've been in business since 2003. This is all we do. We don't get into finance, HR, lawn maintenance. We are strictly source to pay. And we've been right to be in that space for 13 years, and it looks like that's going to be a true statement for the next 20. We deliver our services 3 distinct ways. The first is advisory. So as Anders mentioned, trying to figure out what is it I need to do and where should I go to get it. That can be technology, it could be a commodity strategy, it could be anything across that source to pay spectrum. We try to help our clients figure out what should you do, what is that roadmap that you're trying to achieve. Second is consulting, and that's the bread and butter of most service organizations in terms of its pure execution. So if we've done our job in advisory, or the client has done it on their own to understand what their roadmap is, our job is to come in and provide that additional support to get the job done. And we think about it a little bit differently at Nitor. We're not the expert in everything, and we know that. We're humble in that respect. There's a culture and a history every company has that we want to come in and understand. And in some cases, we're augmenting very talented folks. In other cases, we're bringing in a skill set they don't have for a period of time. But it really is a partnership, and I think that's different, and that's one of the things that makes Nitor different. And then last, we do BPO. So this isn't offshore your entire team to us. We are more about scale. So a great example of that is for a global auto manufacturer, for their RFPs under $100,000, those come into our Cleveland office and our Toronto office. We source those, provide the results back. The point in sourcing and contracts and downstream P2P is how do we make your team get broader, and how do we make sure you use your resources the best way possible? You don't need a sourcing manager who's making 6 digits a year chasing down handbags for the auto show. We can do that out of our Cleveland and Toronto office. So that's who Nitor Partners is. So what we did with QBE was, initially advisory work. It was trying to help them figure out how do we go from, as Anders described, a newly center-led procurement organization globally with no tools and 2 people to a fully rolled out upstream solution set that will provide Anders and his leadership team more access to the business globally. So step 1 was we did an 8-element diagnostic. So I don't think we applied for the trademark yet, but it's how we approach our client engagements. We look across the whole source-to-pay spectrum as an initial step. I think it's important to get client input. So part of our process and part of this high-level box on the slide here is we want to understand from a source-to-pay perspective what's most important. So if you think about the insurance vertical, cost, quality, risk is a big deal, right? That's true in oil and gas. That's true in financial services. Other verticals, their focus is different. So that's the first thing we talked to Anders about is across the source-to-pay spectrum, where are your biggest pain points? And how would you rank those from an investment perspective? So it's a simple exercise. We tell our clients, we told Anders, we had his stakeholders, here's $1. So legal, procurement, accounts payable, business units, how would you spend that $1 across those 8 elements? You can put $1 on one thing, you could split it all up evenly, or you could roughly put it across different functions. And what's interesting is when you get that stakeholder group to do that exercise in the same room, great conversations happen. All of a sudden, legal hears about the pain points that are happening in accounts payable. And all of a sudden, procurement understands a little bit more of what's going on in the business unit. So you average rank the weightings. You come out with at least a starting point to say our priority collectively, not just procurement, not just accounts payable, not just legal or risk management, but the group as a set of stakeholders, our priority is A, B, or C. So in the case of QBE, it was we're a newly formed organization that needs to support our business, so we need to work on our upstream processes. Downstream is coming, but today we're paying our bills. We're not sure how it happens, and not definitely always on time, as I can attest to.
Wow.
Yeah, I said that. So we'll get there. But upstream.
You're not gonna get paid now, are you, man?
Right. I'm just going to get off the stage. But seriously, upstream is less impact to the organization. It's, to Gander's point, it's a more nominal investment than the downstream global deployment. So let's put our efforts there and really give the global team the tools to be global in nature from a process perspective. So that was step 1. Step 2 was how do we go to market? And if you think about all the questions you have to ask, it's like a Rubik's Cube nowadays. So the first one is point versus suite, right? Again, if you look at the vertical aspect of industry, and then you look at upstream, which is typically analytics, sourcing, contracts, supplier management, and downstream, procure to pay, do you really need to be source to pay? Now, Tish got up here yesterday and said that's what the market wants, and I do not disagree. But in practice, in our client base, it's not always what they do for very good business reasons. So that was the first decision point that we had brought to Anderson's leadership team is, do you want to be the best, have the best solution in every case, or are you okay looking at suites? And it was Anders that said to us, I want suite, and I want to be able to scale beyond upstream. So our scope was really, let's solve the upstream problem. But Anders was like, hey, if we're going to go to market, I want to look at the whole thing. I want to look at a solution that if I want to grow beyond this first year, the second year, I have the scale to do it. So that was check. We did that part of the process. Next problem is incumbents and ERPs. So I'm sure you've all had CIOs or folks within your organization say, we're ERP first, or we're going to leverage existing technology investments. And so you immediately come up against a wall of having to disprove the reality of that situation. Should your ERP be the end-all be-all for all solutions internally? I think Tony mentioned Workday in his last session. I mean, Workday is a good example where that's less true today, where ERPs are, for our function, second tier. They're better solutions than most ERP solutions can provide. So back again to Anderson's leadership team, we want to have a suite, but we want it to be procurement-centric. Check that box. Now you've got the firewall, cloud debate, right? So you've got, again, IT. Most IT organizations have kind of gotten around the curve and have developed the protocols and security standards where cloud is an option, and other organizations, not as much of an option. As you can imagine, at an insurance company, it is a challenge. So we had to work through our stakeholder groups to get legal involved, to get IT involved, to understand, is cloud even an option? So after a couple of weeks, we were able to figure it out with the business, say, this is the minimum requirement if we want to go cloud, which is what we decided to do as our primary strategy. And then last, what do we do with, how do we support the system? Which kind of goes to behind the firewall versus cloud, but it's a little bit different. Do we want to become, do we want our competency to become how we can buy and run software, or are we an insurance company? So it's a simple discussion with Anders, at least, because he's very direct and very strategic. That's not our core competency. We don't want to be really good at deploying and supporting software. We want to be good at doing insurance. So with that, we had a very good go-to-market strategy, and I think it's really important because I'm a supplier from a services perspective. I think Richard would agree from a product perspective. When a customer can tell the market very specifically what they're looking for, and not about 10,000 requirements of the system should do this and the system should do that, but from a strategic point of view, you can check those 4 boxes, and there's probably more you guys could define. Us as suppliers, it's very easy to consume that and respond appropriately. And that cuts down the cycle time from 5-stage sourcing process that takes 3 years to maybe less than that. Got it. The result of that is a business case. I think the word business case, like the word strategy, gets tossed around a lot. In our definition, and definitely in Anders' definition, it was, what are the financial P&L benefits and costs of the solution? So don't memorize these numbers. This is an example. It's not the actual business case we did for Anders. But there's a little bit of salesmanship to procurement, right? Whether it's trying to get stakeholders to work with you, or whether it's trying to sell to upper management to go make an investment in procurement, there's a bit of a salesmanship. So it's all on the up and up. The benefits are real. If people sign off on them, the costs are driven through the RFP process and debated and mined with IT. But that's really got to be the output. It's something he can walk upstairs that's very financial, numbers-based, fact-based, that says, if you give me X, I'm going to return X times Y. And that's what we were able to do as an output of our go-to-market strategy. Transition out of advisory into execution. Again, picking Zycus came down to, it gave Anders the ability to go as far wide as he wanted to. If he wanted to go all the way source to pay, which he may or may not comment on later, that's his choice. He's got a solution that can do that. 2, it was cloud-based, right? 3, he didn't have to become an expert at deploying and managing software internally. And then 4, from a partnership perspective and where Zycus is going, it aligned very nicely to Anders' strategy. So all those things together drive a business case that made them select Zycus. So an execution perspective, for us, it really comes back to requirements. Now you got to get down in the details of what is it specifically that each module needs to do, and how does each module interact with each other. So I believe we broke every speed record, considering quality and scope, that Zycus has, because great vision from Anders, great execution from Zycus, and what our role was to make sure what Anders wanted got defined properly and got communicated to Zycus and got built. So we deployed contracts in, I think, something like 10 weeks for 2,000 contracts. The user base has quadrupled since then. I think Anders has the specific numbers. But it's one of those great stories of it went really, really well, right? And I think my lesson learned through that process was strong leadership from the client, good partner. Can be Nitor, of course. I'd love to talk to you after if that's interesting. Whether that's internal resources that you have that just have that skill set or someone else, I think it's a critical asset to project success. And of course, a great partnership with your provider. With that, turn over to Richard.
Thank you, Ryan. Appreciate that. Awesome. So we've heard about the people and the process side. I'll tell you a little bit about the technology side. You know, I think one of the things that's so compelling about this case study, we just talked about agility, but speed and agility really come into play here, because if I recall correctly, I think at last year's Horizon Conference, Anders, you were here as a prospect, right? And in fact, it wasn't a full year ago. It was in November. We were in Dawn's hometown of Amelia Island, Florida, and it was chilly, Dawn. You promised warmer weather. But so more like 11 months ago, you were still a prospect, and here we're going to talk about having, at this point, you know, short 11 months later, really the full upstream footprint with spend analytics, sourcing, contract management in place for QBE, and just as you said, in record time with phases along the way. And you know, as we look at the implementation approach in this particular case, I think you kind of start with where is the biggest pain point at the moment. I think, Anders, in your case, you know, having this proliferation of contracts across multiple business units and geographies was really a key consideration. Getting that up and running and having a very fixed milestone date to have it in place. So if I recall properly, again, the project really kicked off around Thanksgiving of last year. So we sat down and had a turkey dinner. As we know, when we look back in the supply chain, the turkeys didn't enjoy it all that much in any respect. And with a goal then of being live right at New Year's, first of the year. So, you know, really just about a month to implement the contract management solution. So that was really an accelerated approach. It really involved coordination across the teams, from the QBE stakeholders, from the Nitor team, as well as the Zycus team, to really accelerate that whole implementation process and do it successfully. And I think it means standardization. I know you've mentioned that, Anders. That's been an overarching theme here. But with a global organization like QBE, it's about standardizing, but also being able to localize, you know, where appropriate. And with a global organization, that doesn't mean just different language versions, but take the contracts, for example, 7,000 agreements, I think 29 or so different contract types. But then even when we're talking about English contracts, some differences between Ben's Australian version of English, the Queen's English, and my American English had to be localized into the tool. Different metadata, terminology, those kinds of things to achieve those goals simultaneously of how do we standardize but localize to get the buy-in across the organization. And that creates the visibility. The institutionalized sourcing process followed then. So you got contract management up very quickly, and then I think looking at the drivers of the business case, how do we get spend analytics, give us visibility, sourcing tools to execute on those opportunities very quickly, get those savings to be able to generate the ongoing deployment of these tools, have it be self-funding as an initiative. So putting spend in place as well really drove that standardization across the business, because I think it's probably fair to say no real global taxonomy existed in the business previously, to really have the classification and categorization of the spend, to be able to see where those opportunities are for more leverage, for example, across the organization. And the last piece of this puzzle, if you will, financial savings management, really helped introduce a new level of collaboration, I think, for QBE between procurement and finance. So being on the same page with how we're going to calculate savings and allocate and amortize those savings over different accounting periods and those things really added up to having that entire sourcing suite in place and having that footprint and getting the efficiencies that come with it. You see there's some areas grayed out. We'll talk about what lies ahead in the future in some of those downstream processes as well. But this was the key from a technology footprint standpoint. And, the key impacts, I think, that this created included true transparency, horizontally and vertically, so across geographies, the 5 continents that we're talking about, across business units as well, being able to assign projects and tasks and track how those things are proceeding drove accountability. And the commonality, a lingua franca for the business, if you will, in terms of that taxonomy, a common way of looking at and classifying spending, or a common metadata language applied to those contracts to make them rationalize and standardize across the business as well. And just to kind of give you a glimpse of sort of what that looks like, I know it's a little bit of an eye chart here, but 5-step sourcing process is what they wanted to institutionalize. And you can see them here. It's phase 1, identify opportunities, develop category profile and strategy, pre-qualify suppliers, and conduct the RFX. Then phase 4, develop and negotiate and implement the agreement. So 5 steps. Some had 7 steps. Actually reminds me of the joke that the late, great Yogi Berra told when he said, he was going to get a pizza, and he said, I'm really not that hungry. You better cut it in 6 slices instead of 8 so that I can finish it all. And I think it kind of applies here. Whether it's 7 steps, whether it's 5 steps, they're very similar. But I think the key from an organizational standpoint is having everyone on the same page. When we say this is what we mean, so that it becomes repeatable, it becomes institutionalized. So with that in mind, the 5 steps, now I can create, and this is using the iManage tool, a project tracking mechanism. I can list all those projects, sourcing projects that I'm working on. I know who the project owner is. I know what the planned start and stop date. I can see visually what the current status is on that. I can allocate and assign tasks and track that they're being fulfilled on schedule. And I think that kind of visibility for someone in Anders' chair as the CPO is really the kind of the holy grail to be able to manage that entire function very effectively. So that's kind of a snapshot from the technology standpoint. Now, certainly that's a lot of progress in a very short period of time. As I said, really just about 11 months to have that entire sourcing suite in place. I'd like to have Anders kind of come back and tell us a little bit about where do we go from here, the road ahead.
Thank you. So I think you minimized the value of really, I'm not going to sell the iManage platform, right? Because one of the big challenges we had is we had great sourcing people all around the world. But as we were doing good work, we weren't leaving behind the documentation we need to prove that we actually did the work. So while we had a contract somehow that saved money somehow, we didn't really be able to tell the story from beginning to end. And iManage really helps us do that, where we set up the process at the beginning, we decide what subtasks within each of the major tasks we need to do, and then management signs off for each step along the way. It's a very powerful tool, and we're actually making the procurement guys, the sourcing guys, do the work that they should have been doing, right? So managing it from across the globe, I mean, it's pretty powerful stuff, and now it has to be done, and it's audit-proof, which is kind of important for us. So a little bit about the road ahead. So we talked about the fully integrated suite being the reason why we started doing this in the first place, or with Zycus anyway. And right now, we are in the very final steps of validating a business case to take the source-to-pay suite globally. We're still sort of fighting some of these ERP battles, as you probably knew we would. But the good news now is by putting the upstream suite in first, we actually have a good story to say that if we split off the procure-to-pay piece from the source-to-pay piece, this disruption in process, we can't leverage the contract management repository we just spent a year putting in. We can't leverage the sourcing tools that we currently have put in without breaking process in the buyer desk. So I think it's a good story to tell about why we want a fully integrated sourcing suite. And I'm sure that I'll be having many discussions with Zycus over the next couple hours about trying to sort of make that materialize for us. So the other thing we're trying to do is to bring the vendor management and vendor risk management piece within procurement. So as you can imagine, with a global organization the size of QBE, we have more risk people that you can shake a stick at. And nobody's managing vendor risks. We're managing BCPs in each division. We're managing financial stability assessments in each division. We're all doing it differently, of course. And enterprise risk is doing the information security stuff different in each division. So what we want to do is we want to bring that within procurement, set up a vendor management center of excellence, and really start driving that process through. And again, that's being business case now for next year. So without making any real commitments, I mean, we're really hoping that next year we will have at least one of the divisions on a P2P system. Hopefully this one, because I think that's the only way we're going to be able to do it in a year, given the speed that we move. And also the SRM system up and running as well. But I think, what I do want to say is that, the Zycus implementation team, I mean, they're rock stars. They really made this happen for us. Nobody believed me at QBE when I said we handed them the requirements before Thanksgiving, and when we came back 2 weeks later, the environment was up and running and we can start testing. Even the rapid deployment guys that had done cloud solutions before didn't believe me when I said that. And until they saw it and could touch it, it was kind of an unreal thing. So I think by doing a lot of the work up front and trying to do it right, and then having this guy chase this guy, and I can step back and make sure.
It real easy. He's
right.
younger
It was awesome, right?
Yeah.
It kept my team, as small as it is, such as it is, out of the fray, and making sure that it got managed properly, and that's the reason why we could bring the system up, migrate, first 2,000 agreements, and then now continuing to migrate content to the tool. So we're fully up and running with 7,000 agreements globally now. We're still finding more in desk drawers, broom closets, wherever people have contracts. So we're using iAnalyze to sort of monitor vendor clip levels. So if you're over X dollars, you need to have an agreement, and then we keep lowering that X so that we're making sure the contracts are in the system. So that's without saying too much, but really we're looking forward to continued partnership with both Zycus and Nitor to make the progression happen. So I think that's the last slide. Yes. So with that,
it is, but we intentionally left some time for audience questions.
We do everything very quickly. I guess that's what we're trying to say.
Ahead of schedule.
So you have 11 minutes.
All right.
Wonderful.
But who's counting?
We have a question from Ben in the front. I don't know if do we have mics
Yes,
available?
we do. Right here.
Yeah, we have a question right here.
Firstly, I'll just congratulate you guys on such a quick implementation. But I'm interested to know what length of prep work was required between the consultancy relationship to get to a position to develop the business case, and also I'm guessing you would have had to do some project planning in-house. So how did where did all that take place, and what was the length of time to sort of get yourselves ready so that you could go fast?
Well, we brought Nitor in for, I think, a 3-week engagement to help us with the, who's who in the zoo, based on our requirements that we talked about, the 4 check boxes, right? So who can really meet those requirements? Who are really fully integrated? Which suppliers out there have a suite solution that is on this common code base? Because, you have suite solutions and you have suite solutions, and not all of them are the same, right? So I wanted one on the same code base, so the user interface would be the same. There wouldn't be behind-the-scenes integration. So, we went through a lot of that work in 3 weeks, right? So having somebody that's done sourcing engagements again and again and again in this space was kind of powerful. Once we had gone to market, once we did the market assessment, we started ramping this up already, started identifying stakeholders. Because really, our job at this point would be to identify who the stakeholders were so we can sit down with them and have requirements about, their part of the sandbox. And then once it was, all full steam ahead, we contracted with Nitor to do the requirements and do that work while we were contracting with Zycus in the back end. Somehow it took longer with Zycus than with these guys, but it is what it is.
I think like some of the specifics you're asking about, it's hard to pin a time on, but that time period of initial 3 weeks to sort of get our heads around what we're doing, and then 10 weeks to get to selection and negotiation. In that period, we're working on the business case, the implementation plan, starting to tighten that down. So I think the work effort's not heavy because we've done it before. I think the secret of the sauce is getting it in Anders' hands in the right format so he can shop it around, right? And then we can support him in that respect. So I'd say the whole thing to get back from Thanksgiving was 10 to 12 weeks of, again, not full time, but there's a lot of selling, preparing, tweaking, decotizing stuff, right?
And the other thing too is we were lucky because we had legacy systems that we could retire. So we were paying a software as a service fee for the crappy systems we retired. I mean, so the business case, at least for contracts and some of this upstream stuff, pretty much wrote itself. All right. Yeah, we got a few.
Question right in front, Gary.
Hold on one sec.
So I'm just a twofold question on opportunity identification. So the first one is, did you deploy iRequest?
No.
You did not. So with that then, so the opportunity identification, does that mainly come from your stakeholders, or are your category leads using your analytics tool to identify the opportunities themselves?
So we relied a lot on tribal knowledge at the beginning, right? Because we had sourcing teams in each division. iAnalyze just came online a couple of weeks ago, and we're still continuing to massage the data. So up until now, we've been relying on tribal knowledge, knowing when contracts are up for renewal, talking to the business. The other thing, too, around the claims spend category. So our spend profile is we have about $1.8 billion in indirect spend, about $7 billion in claims spend, or claims vendor spend, which is not taking indemnity out. So, windshields and glass and I don't know what, but that kind of stuff. So, farming the claim spend for opportunities was actually turned out to be a lot easier because it was fertile ground. Indirect, we've done a good job sourcing, and the consultants had gone in and sourced the hell out of that because it's easy, right? So to answer your question, tribal knowledge, for the most part. Now we have, clear visibility. So it was quite revealing to even our senior executives that we spent X amount of dollars with, these companies, because it was like somebody turned a light on. When you finally bring everything together, you get parent-child relationship mapping, and you kind of roll it up on a global scale. It was kind of cool. All right. So we have more questions in the...
Up over here.
Yeah, so as you put your contracts into the system, what kind of concerns did you have around data quality with the metadata, and then what kind of governance things did you put in place to manage that?
Well, the first governance piece was policy. Thou shalt put your contract in the system. The second thing we do is, in each of my divisional teams, so now I have divisional teams, and I also have a team in Manila, we have set up a process that every time a contract gets loaded, it goes someplace and we review it for data quality before we publish it. That way we don't repeat the sins of the past. It's a very manual process, but it works. On the other side of that, we're in the process of putting together a contract review team in Manila, so we can get lawyers down there fairly inexpensive and have them go in for some of these larger relationships. We have legacy contracts, and go in and read the contract and pull the metadata out, so we actually have a good repository for those major relationships as well.
Back here.
Question in the back?
Uh-huh.
So we're on a similar journey, and I'm curious, when you started out, did the different regions all report to you already, or was it all decentralized?
So I want to make the clarifying thing here is I'm not the Chief Procurement Officer. I have 4 peers that are regional heads of procurement. So I have one head of procurement in England, one in AO, one in Australia, one in North America. And we all report to the chief procurement officer. There's also a global IT sourcing team. So I'm sort of, well, I got more than half of the group now. So I run everything non-sourcing related. So vendor management, reporting, metrics, P2P eventually, vendor management, I don't know what, but.
Were they already reporting to the CPO, or were they reporting up through each individual business unit?
They were reporting into the business in each division, and then now, come January 1st, 2014, they reported to the CPO. We started creating that organization.
So my question then is, what were the challenges in getting each of those business units to release control over that function?
Well, it's an ongoing battle, right? Because people are very, I'm trying to be politically astute here, but some divisions are having a much more separation anxiety than others. So what I found here is Australians are very easygoing, right? They're very easygoing. They will say, yeah, whatever, fine, we'll deal with it. North Americans will do pretty much whatever you say. So if you can make a business case for it, it's like, oh yeah, that makes sense. Let's go do it. The Brits are the ones we're having some real challenges with, where there's kind of like, well, so if I hire somebody in England, which I often have done lately, is the question I always get is, are they going to report to group, which is my function within group, or are they going to report to EO, which is the European operation? And the irony here is that we all work for group because we're in group procurement, but this whole division between, okay, I'm an EO employee or I'm a group employee, and that's the only place where that's happening. So a lot of that is because they want to, the Brits want to be autonomous, much more so than the other divisions, for all the right reasons, because they're highly profitable. Lloyd's market is there, which is pretty big in insurance. But it's continuing to sell and sell and sell. And the fact that we are a cost center, not a profit center, doesn't help, because as we invest in procurement infrastructure and more people and more stuff, they get a third of the charge for that. So it's not an easy sell, but we have some really good savings numbers to put on the board to back that up as well. So you kind of have to bring it to be able to earn it. So we have an ROE ratio about three times right now.
We have time for one last question.
All right.
Going. Thank you, guys. That was wonderful.